My sister's new boyfriend mocked me at dinner, and everyone laughed. My mother leaned over and hissed at me to stop making the family look bad. So I sat there and let them talk. I let them insult my clothes, my car, and my life. But then he made the mistake of bragging about his job at the exact firm I was secretly auditing. I pulled out my phone, sent one text, and watched their smiles fade. My name is Simone, and at 30 years old, I had become the family punchline. They thought I was a failure because I drove a Honda and wore suits without logos. They had no idea I owned Vanguard Risk, a multi-million-dollar firm that hunted white-collar criminals. And tonight, the criminal was sitting right across from me. Before I tell you how I took him down, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep who was actually the wolf in disguise. The heavy oak doors of Le Ciel swung open and I stepped into the chilled air of Atlanta's most pretentious restaurant. It was the kind of place where the lighting was dim enough to hide secrets, but bright enough to make diamonds sparkle. I checked my watch. I was exactly 5 minutes late. My mother Verna hated lateness almost as much as she hated poverty. I smoothed down my gray blazer. It was bespoke Italian wool, tailored perfectly to my frame, but to the untrained eye it looked simple, boring even. That was the point. In my line of work, blending in was a weapon. I spotted my family at the center table, the one reserved for people who needed to be seen. My mother was wearing a hat that was too large for indoors. My younger sister Ebony was flashing her teeth at her phone camera. And sitting between them was a man I had never met but instantly recognized. Not because I knew him personally, but because I knew his type. He was wearing a suit that was too shiny and a watch that was too big. This was Brad. As I approached the table, the conversation stopped. Brad looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on my comfortable flat shoes with a look of pure disgust. "Is this the sister you told me about?" he asked Ebony, his voice loud enough to turn heads at the nearby tables. I thought the Grubhub delivery driver had walked through the wrong entrance. The table erupted in laughter. My mother did not defend me. She did not correct him. Instead, she reached out and grabbed my wrist, her nails digging into my skin, and yanked me into the empty chair. "Sit down," she hissed under her breath. "Do not stand there looking like a statue and making me look bad. Put your purse under the table. It does not match the decor." I looked at my mother. Her eyes were hard. She was terrified that my presence would somehow crack the veneer of upper-class perfection she had spent 40 years trying to build. I sat down and placed my plain leather tote bag on the floor. "Hello, Mother," I said, my voice calm. "Hello, Ebony. And you must be Brad." Brad did not offer his hand. He just swirled his whiskey and smirked. "Yeah, I am Brad. Nice of you to finally show up. We were about to order the good stuff, and I was not sure if your palate could handle it." Ebony giggled, adjusting the strap of her dress to show more skin. "Don't mind her, Brad. Simone is just overwhelmed. She is not used to places without a drive-through window." The waiter barely had time to set the menus down before Brad grabbed the main dinner menu out of his hands. He held it open like a king reading a decree, ignoring the fact that my mother had not even opened hers yet. I watched him run his finger down the list of entrees, his eyes scanning only the right side of the page where the prices were listed. He did not care about the ingredients. He only cared about the number. "I will have the filet mignon with the foie gras topping." He declared, his pronunciation of foie gras so mangled that the waiter blinked twice before nodding politely. "And for the table, we will have 2 orders of the black truffle risotto. Make sure you shave extra truffles on top. I want to see the money on the plate." He looked around the table for approval. My mother nodded enthusiastically, as if ordering mushrooms was a talent. Then Brad turned his hooded eyes toward me. He looked at my water glass, and then at the menu I had not been allowed to touch. "You know what, Simone?" he said, his voice dripping with mock concern. "Maybe we should not get the truffles for you. I know your type. You are probably used to eating Popeye's fried chicken out of a grease-stained box. Your stomach is not built for fine dining." He chuckled, looking at Ebony for validation. Rich food like this might make you sick. A poor person's gut does not know how to digest truffles. It is a biological fact. Let me order you the soup. The potato leek is the cheapest thing on the menu, so it should be right up your alley. It will remind you of the cafeteria food you probably eat at work. It is simple and bland, just like your outfit. Ebony let out a high-pitched giggle that grated on my nerves. She pulled out her phone immediately, the flash illuminating our faces in the dim restaurant. She snapped a photo of Brad holding the wine list, and me sitting there with my hands folded, looking plain and unadorned. I watched her thumbs fly across the screen as she posted it to her Instagram story. I did not need to check my phone to know what the caption said, but I saw it reflect in her sunglasses. Upscale dinner and the Cinderella sister. She added a laughing emoji and hit post. Look at her, Brad, Ebony said, showing him the screen. She looks like she is at a funeral. Lighten up, Simone. Brad is just trying to expand your horizons. Most people would kill to eat here, and you are sitting there like a statue. Be grateful. I took a slow breath, inhaling the scent of expensive perfume and desperation that clung to my family. I am very grateful, Ebony. I said, my voice steady. It is fascinating to watch Brad order. He certainly has a unique way with the French language. Brad narrowed his eyes, suspecting an insult, but unable to find it in my flat tone. Yeah, well, I speak the language of money, he grunted. And that is the only language that matters in this town. Now waiter, bring us the wine, and bring her the soup, unless you have a kid's menu hiding somewhere. The tension at the table was thick enough to cut with a steak knife after my question about Apex Capital, but before Brad could stutter out a lie, we were interrupted. A young man in a burgundy vest approached our table. It was the valet captain. He held up a car key with a faded black plastic fob that had a piece of clear tape holding the battery cover in place. Excuse me, miss, he said, looking directly at me. I believe you dropped this near the entrance when you walked in. It is for the silver Honda Civic. I reached out to take the key, but once again Brad was faster. He snatched the fob from the valet's hand and held it up to the chandelier light like it was a fascinating archaeological discovery. He let out a bark of laughter that caused patrons 3 tables away to turn and stare. A 2015 Honda Civic. He shouted, his voice booming across the dining room. You are still driving that chicken coop. I thought you would have scrapped that piece of junk years ago. I bet the engine noise wakes up the entire neighborhood every time you turn the ignition. Does it even have air conditioning, or do you just roll down the windows and pray for a breeze? He dangled the key in front of my face, taunting me. Look at this, Ebony. Your sister is driving a car that is worth less than the shoes I am wearing right now. It is pathetic. It is actually offensive that she parked this thing next to my Porsche. My mother snatched the key from Brad and shoved it aggressively into my hand, her face contorted with embarrassment. She looked around the restaurant, smiling apologetically at the other diners, as if my car was a personal failure she had to explain away. She is incredibly stingy, Verna said, her voice dripping with disdain. She hoards every penny she makes. But then again, what can you expect? She works a dead-end data entry job earning pennies. Where would she find the money to upgrade to a respectable vehicle? She refuses to ask for help because she is too stubborn to admit she failed. So she drives that eyesore and embarrasses us all. I quietly took the key and slipped it into my blazer pocket. I did not say a word. I did not tell them that the Honda was my surveillance vehicle. I did not tell them that it had a modified engine and reinforced glass. I did not tell them that my daily driver was a Bentley Bentayga that was currently sitting in a climate-controlled garage while I finished this investigation. I drove the Civic because in my line of work, being invisible was more valuable than being flashy. Criminals noticed Ferraris. They did not notice a dented Honda Civic parked down the street. But to my mother and Brad, money that was not displayed was money that did not exist. They measured worth in chrome and leather. I measured it in equity and intelligence. I looked at my mother, who was busy smoothing her napkin and refusing to meet my eyes. She truly believed I was poor. She truly believed I was a failure. And that belief was exactly what was going to cost her everything. The laughter over my car keys had barely subsided when Ebony decided to pour gasoline on the fire. She leaned into Brad, her shoulder brushing against his cheap suit jacket, and let out a long, performative sigh. "You are so right about her lack of ambition, babe," she said, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that was meant to be heard by everyone at the table. "It is actually getting really sad. Just last week, she called me in the middle of the day, completely hysterical. She was crying so hard, I could barely understand her. She was stuck on the side of the highway because one of the tires on that old Honda had finally blown out. She did not even have the money for a tow truck, let alone a new tire. She begged me for $200 just to get back on the road. I felt so bad for her that I just Venmoed it to her right then and there. I knew I would never see that money again, but what kind of sister would I be if I left her stranded? I stared at my sister, my mouth slightly open in disbelief. The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. My mind flashed back to exactly where I was last Tuesday. I was in the middle of a forensic accounting audit when my personal phone buzzed with an emergency text from Ebony. It was not a flat tire. She was at the Serenity Day Spa in Buckhead. She had racked up a bill for a chemical peel and a deep tissue massage, and when she went to pay, her credit card was declined for insufficient funds. The manager was threatening to call the police. I had left my office, driven 20 minutes in traffic, and walked into that spa to find Ebony arguing with the receptionist while wearing a plush white robe. I pulled $200 in cash from my wallet and paid her bill to save her from being arrested for theft of services. I did not lecture her. I did not ask for the money back. I just paid it and went back to work. And now she was sitting here using my generosity to paint me as a charity case. Brad shook his head, looking at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "You are a saint, Ebony," he said, kissing her hand. "You have a heart of gold, but you have to be careful, babe. People like Simone are financial black holes. If you keep bailing her out, she will never learn to stand on her own 2 feet. $200 might not seem like a lot to people like us, but to her it is probably a fortune. You are enabling her mediocrity." I could not take it anymore. The injustice burned in my throat like bile. I straightened my spine and looked directly at Ebony. "That is not what happened," I said, my voice cutting through the ambient noise of the restaurant. "You were the one who called me. You were at the spa and your card was declined. I paid your bill, Ebony. You owe me $200, not the other way around." Before I could get another word out, a sharp pain shot through my leg. My mother's hand had shot out like a viper under the heavy damask tablecloth. Her manicured nails dug viciously into the soft flesh of my thigh, finding a nerve and pinching hard. I gasped involuntarily. I looked at her and her eyes were dark pools of warning. She did not look at me with love or even recognition. She looked at me like I was a threat that needed to be neutralized. "Shut your mouth!" she hissed, her voice so low only I could hear it. "Do not you dare embarrass your sister in front of this man. He is a provider, Simone. He is going to take care of us. If you ruin this for her with your petty jealousies, I will never forgive you. Smile and eat your soup." I looked at my mother's hand still gripping my leg, her knuckles white with the effort of silencing me. She knew the truth. She knew Ebony was broke. She knew I was the one who quietly fixed everything. But the truth was inconvenient. The truth did not fit the narrative of black excellence she was trying to sell to this fraud in a shiny suit, so she hurt me to protect the lie. I slowly closed my mouth and picked up my spoon. The pain in my leg throbbed in time with my heartbeat. I swallowed the soup, but it tasted like betrayal. With the appetizer plates cleared away, my mother Verna decided it was time to perform her favorite monologue. She took a long, delicate sip of her wine and set the glass down with a sharp click, turning her full beaming attention to Ebony. "You know, Brad," she began, her voice taking on that smooth, rehearsed quality she used when trying to impress the church elders. "Ebony was simply born for this kind of life. Even as a tiny child, she had a presence about her. When she walked into a room, people stopped to look. She has that natural grace that you just cannot teach in a school. She was destined to be a lady of status, a wife who knows how to host, how to charm, and how to make a man feel like a king. That is the mark of a true woman of quality. She reached over and patted Ebony's hand, her face glowing with a pride that had never once shone for me. Then her eyes flicked to me, and the light died instantly, replaced by a cold, disappointed stare. And then there is Simone. She sighed heavily, as if my very existence was a cross she had to bear daily. From the moment she could walk, she was just difficult. Always in a corner somewhere, sullen and silent. While Ebony was practicing her pageant wave, Simone was hiding in her dark room, tapping away on some computer. No social skills, no charm, just numbers and screens. I tried to mold her, Brad, I really did. I tried to put her in cotillion, I tried to teach her how to dress, but she has no spirit, no chi. She is content to be invisible. It is a tragedy, really, to have one child who shines so bright, and another who is just a shadow in the background. I sat there feeling the old familiar ache in my chest, the one that never quite healed. It did not matter that I had graduated top of my class. It did not matter that my tapping on a computer had built a forensic empire that protected billions of dollars. To Verna, value was only skin deep. If you could not wear it or drive it, it did not count. I was the worker bee, the mule bred to carry the load so the show pony could prance. Brad draped his heavy arm around Ebony's shoulders, pulling her close in a possessive squeeze. He looked at my mother with a conspiratorial grin that made my skin crawl. "Do not worry, Mom," he said, using the familial term, way too early. "You did your best, Verna. You cannot save everyone. Some people are just determined to be mediocre. But listen to me, when I marry Ebony, I am going to change everything for this family. I am going to put the Blackwell name on the map in a way you never dreamed possible. We are going to be Atlanta royalty. I will make sure you and Ebony are taken care of forever. We are going to the top." He paused and turned his head slowly to look at me, his eyes cold and dismissive. "Well, most of us are going to the top. We cannot drag dead weight up the mountain, Verna. If people do not want to progress, if they are happy driving their little Hondas and living their little lives, then we have to leave them behind. We cannot let their failure drag down our success." Brad took a long sip of his wine and set the glass down hard enough to make the silverware rattle. He leaned forward, placing his elbows on the table, a breach of etiquette he seemed oblivious to as he launched into a lecture that made my skin crawl. "You know, Simone," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone that was loud enough for the next table to hear. "There is a responsibility that comes with people like us making it. We call it Black excellence. But I do not think you understand the concept. It is not just about having a job. It is about the flex. It is about walking into a room and commanding respect before you even open your mouth. It is about showing the world that we have arrived and we can buy and sell them." He gestured dismissively at my outfit, his eyes raking over my blazer with disdain. "When you dress like that, you are letting the side down. You look invisible. You look like the help. When white folks see you, they think we are all struggling. You are damaging the brand, Simone. You are bad for the image of the community. A Black woman of status should shine. She should be wearing logos that people can read from across the street. You should be in Gucci or Balenciaga, not this generic bargain bin trash. You need to signal your worth. If you do not look expensive, nobody is going to treat you like you have value." I gripped the linen napkin in my lap so tight my knuckles turned white. The sheer ignorance was suffocating. My suit was not generic. It was a bespoke commission from a tailor in Milan, made of vicuna wool, that cost more per yard than Brad's entire polyester wardrobe. I did not wear logos, because I did not need a brand to validate my existence. I understood quiet luxury. I understood that true power does not need to scream, but explaining that to a man who thought a shiny suit equaled success would be a waste of breath. My mother sat there nodding in agreement, her eyes shining as if Brad were preaching the gospel. She had spent her life chasing the appearance of wealth, and now she had found a false prophet who validated her shallow worldview. Just as Brad opened his mouth to deliver another insult about my lack of style, I felt a vibration against my thigh. It was a single long buzz followed by a short, sharp pulse. My heart skipped a beat. This was the priority alert I had been waiting for. I kept my face perfectly neutral, a mask of bored resignation, while my right hand slid slowly under the table. I slipped my phone out of my pocket and glanced down at the screen. The notification was bright against the dark background. Target is in Atlanta. The file is ready for download. A cold thrill ran down my spine. The waiting was over. The lecture on excellence was about to end, and a lesson in reality was about to begin. I needed to check that file. I needed to know exactly what kind of fraud I was dealing with before I burned this table to the ground. I started to push my chair back. I reached for my purse, intending to excuse myself to the ladies' room. "I am just going to step away for a moment," I said quietly. "I will be right back." Bam! Brad slammed his open palm down on the linen tablecloth. The sudden violence of it made the silverware jump and the water in the glasses tremble. "Sit down!" He barked, his voice loud and commanding, like he was disciplining a disobedient dog. I froze halfway out of my chair, my muscles locking up from the sheer shock of his aggression. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I am speaking," Brad growled, leaning over the table, his eyes dark with a petty tyrant's rage. "I am giving you valuable life advice about how to fix your broken life, and you are going to walk away while I am talking. Do you not have any manners at all? In my circles, when a vice president speaks, you listen. You sit your behind down, and you show some respect. You do not move until I dismiss you." My mother looked terrified. The color drained from her face, leaving her makeup looking stark and garish. She grabbed my forearm with a desperate strength, pulling me back toward the chair. "Simone, sit down," she whispered frantically, her eyes darting between me and Brad. "Do not make him angry. He is trying to help you. Show some gratitude." I looked at my mother, cowering before this man, just because she thought he had money. I looked at Ebony, staring at her phone, pretending this abuse was not happening. And I looked at Brad, his face flushed red with the cheap power of a bully. He thought he was the king of the world because he had a corporate card and a loud voice. Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud explosion. It was a quiet click, like a lock turning or a safety being switched off. I was done. I was done being the daughter who took it. I was done being the sister who paid the bills and got the insults. I was done being the quiet observer. I sat back down slowly, my movements deliberate and controlled. But I did not look down at my plate. I did not hunch my shoulders in defeat. I lifted my chin and looked Brad straight in the eyes. My gaze locked onto his, and I did not blink. The air at the table changed instantly. It grew heavy and cold, charged with a sudden static electricity. "Are you finished?" I asked. My voice was different now. It was not the soft, apologetic voice of Simone, the disappointed daughter. It was the voice of Simone, the CEO of Vanguard Risk. The voice that made corrupt executives sweat in their depositions. The voice that commanded rooms far more important than this one. Brad blinked, surprised by the sudden shift in my demeanor. For a split second, I saw hesitation in his eyes, a flicker of doubt. But his ego was too big to let him see the danger standing right in front of him. He scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Yeah, I am finished for now. Try to listen next time." I smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a hunter who just watched the prey walk into the trap. "Okay," I said smoothly. I listened. "Now it is my turn. Let's talk about your job, Brad. Tell me more about Apex Capital." Brad adjusted his lapels with a self-satisfied grin, his chest puffing out as if he were about to address the United Nations instead of a dinner table in Atlanta. "You want to know about Apex Capital?" he asked, his voice booming with performative modesty. "Well, Simone, Apex is not just a firm. It is the premier venture capital powerhouse in the Southeast. And I am not just an employee there. I am the vice president of strategic acquisitions. My mother let out a breathless gasp, clutching her pearls, as if the title alone were enough to induce a religious experience. Ebony looked around the room, hoping strangers were listening to her boyfriend's accolades. Brad continued his ego trip, fueled by their adoration. Just this morning, while you were probably logging data into a spreadsheet, I was closing a $50 million merger between a tech startup and a logistics giant. It was a war room situation. Lawyers screaming, investors panicking. But I walked in there, slammed my portfolio on the table, and told them exactly how it was going to go down. By noon, I had signatures on the dotted line and a $50 million wire transfer hitting our accounts. That is what I do, Simone. I move mountains. I make things happen that people like you only read about in the news. He took a celebratory swig of his wine, eyeing me over the rim of the glass, expecting to see me wither under the weight of his success. He expected awe. He expected jealousy. What he did not expect was the tiny, almost imperceptible smirk that tugged at the corner of my mouth. Because Brad had made a fatal error, a catastrophic miscalculation that was about to cost him everything. He had lied about the one company in the entire world that he should have never mentioned in my presence. Apex Capital. I knew Apex Capital. I knew them intimately. In fact, I knew them better than their own board of directors did. My firm, Vanguard Risk, was their exclusive external auditor. We were the ones they called when numbers did not add up. We were the ones who vetted their high-level executives. We were the watchdogs who ensured their millions stayed safe from fraud. I had personally sat in meetings with their CEO, David, reviewing quarterly risk assessments. I knew the names of every vice president in the company. I knew their salaries, their bonuses, and their backgrounds. And I knew for a fact that there was no vice president named Brad. I looked at him sitting there in his polyester blend suit, bragging about a $50 million deal that I knew never happened. Apex had not closed a merger today. I would have known. My team would have been the ones conducting the due diligence. The only thing Apex had done today was flag a series of suspicious credit card transactions that had triggered a silent alarm in my system this morning. It took every ounce of my self-control not to laugh in his face right then and there. He was not a shark. He was a minnow swimming in a tank with a great white, and he did not even realize he was bleeding. Wow, I said, my voice dripping with false admiration. $50 million in one morning. That sounds incredibly stressful. The compliance paperwork alone must be a nightmare. I assume you work closely with the audit team to clear those kinds of transactions. Brad waved his hand dismissively. Compliance. Please. Those guys work for me. I tell them what to sign and they sign it. I am the rainmaker, Simone. The rules are different for people who bring in the big money. I nodded slowly, sipping my water to hide the predator's smile forming on my lips. Is that so? I murmured. Interesting. Very interesting. I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hand, adopting the posture of a student eager to learn from the master. You know, Brad, I said, keeping my voice soft and full of feigned admiration. I have read quite a bit about Apex Capital in the business journals. I heard their hiring process is legendary for being rigorous. They say the background checks alone take months, and the risk assessment team is incredibly thorough. You must be truly exceptional to have cleared their vetting process so quickly. I imagine it takes a very specific kind of integrity to pass their standards. Brad laughed again, a sound that was becoming more grating by the second. He waved his hand as if swatting away a gnat. Risk assessment. Please. You are so naive, Simone. Those guys are just paper pushers. They are the people we hire to check the boxes so the real players can do the work. They work for me. They do not vet me. I vet them. If one of those compliance officers looks at me the wrong way, I snap my fingers and they are gone. Bay Area tech companies might care about that stuff, but here in Atlanta, money talks and compliance walks. Those auditors are just failed brokers who could not cut it on the trading floor. I felt a cold amusement settle in my chest. He was talking about my employees. He was talking about the team I had handpicked and trained to spot liars exactly like him. He was insulting the very people who held his fate in their hands, and he was doing it to the face of the woman who signed their paychecks. It was almost too perfect. He was calling my life's work a failure while trying to impress my family with a job he probably did not even have. Wow, I said, widening my eyes to mask the predatory gleam I knew was surfacing. That is so powerful. It must be amazing to have that kind of authority, to just be above the rules, to not have to worry about audits or oversight. It is. Brad grinned, showing teeth that had clearly been professionally whitened. It is the only way to live. Rules are for people who drive Honda Simone, not for people who drive the market. You follow the rules because you are afraid. I break the rules because I am the one who makes them. While he turned to Ebony to explain the difference between a merger and an acquisition, getting most of the technical details wrong, I slipped my hand beneath the table again. My mother was nodding along, entranced by his buzzwords, but I was focused on the phone in my lap. I unlocked it by touch and opened the secure messaging app I used with my team. I typed without looking, my thumbs moving from muscle memory. Verify employment. Name Brad. Company Apex Capital. Level Priority 1. Run full background check. I hit send and felt the tiny vibration of confirmation against my palm. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the snap. I looked at my mother, who was watching Brad with an expression of pure rapture. She thought she had won the lottery. She thought she had finally secured the status she craved. She had no idea she was betting on a horse with a broken leg. Brad took another bite of his steak, chewing with his mouth open while he lectured my brother-in-law about cryptocurrency. I took a sip of water and waited. The reply from my team would come in less than 3 minutes. Vanguard Risk did not play games, and neither did I. Brad wiped the grease from his mouth with the linen napkin, tossing it carelessly onto the table. He leaned back, stretching his arms out and taking up as much space as possible. So, Simone, he said, his tone shifting from boastful to inquisitive, but with a sharp edge. Enough about my empire. Let's talk about your little job. What exactly do you do all day? Data entry. Answering phones. Or are you one of those customer service reps who reads from a script when my internet goes down? I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water. I work in data processing and file evaluation, I said, keeping my answer intentionally vague. It involves a lot of analysis. Brad snorted a derisive sound that made his nose wrinkle. Analysis. That is a fancy word for reading. So you read files. You sit in a cubicle under fluorescent lights and read papers that other people wrote. Sounds thrilling. Do you get to use a highlighter, or is that too much responsibility for your pay grade? Ebony let out a shrill laugh, covering her mouth with her hand. Oh, stop it, Brad, you are terrible. But seriously, he is kind of right, Simone. You always try to make it sound so important. Data processing, file evaluation, just admit it. You are basically a glorified spell checker. You look for typos in contracts, so the real lawyers do not have to waste their time. It is not exactly brain surgery, is it? My mother nodded in agreement, her face set in a mask of disappointment. Ebony is right, Simone. You have always tried to dress up your mediocrity with big words. There is no shame in being an assistant, but do not try to act like you are running the show. We all know you are just a cog in the machine, a very small, easily replaceable cog. You should be asking Brad for advice on how to move up. Maybe he can get you a job as a receptionist at his firm. At least then, you would be around successful people. Maybe some of it would rub off on you. I felt the familiar sting of their dismissal, but this time it was dulled by the knowledge I held in my hand. I was not a cog. I was the wrench that could stop the entire machine. My work in data processing involved analyzing complex financial trails, tracing laundered money through shell companies, and identifying embezzlement schemes that had been hidden for years. My file evaluation was determining whether a CEO went to prison or just got fired, but to them I was just Simone the disappointment. Simone the spell checker. That sounds like a great opportunity, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I am sure working near someone like Brad would be very educational. I imagine there is a lot to learn from his unique approach to finance. Brad preened, soaking up the compliment like a sponge. Exactly, he said, pointing a finger at me. You could learn a lot just by watching me work. I could teach you how to dress, how to talk, how to close a deal. But first you have to admit that you need help. You have to admit that your little data job is a dead end. You are 30 years old, Simone. Where is your corner office? Where is your bonus check? Where is your legacy? You are building nothing. You are just taking up space. I looked at him. Really looked at him. I saw the sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air conditioning. I saw the way his eyes darted around the room seeking validation. I saw the fear behind the arrogance. He was desperate, he was drowning, and he was trying to use me as a stepping stone to keep his head above water. I am building something, I said quietly. You just cannot see it yet. But you will, very soon. My phone vibrated against my thigh again. It was the second signal, the confirmation. While Brad continued to drone on about the importance of networking with the right kind of people, I slid my hand beneath the table. The heavy linen tablecloth provided the perfect cover. I pulled the phone from my pocket and rested it on my lap, angling the screen away from my mother's prying eyes. She was too busy gazing at Brad with hero worship to notice anyway. I tapped the screen. A new message from my lead investigator at Vanguard had popped up. It was a single PDF file attached to a secure message. The subject line read simply, Apex Capital Personnel File Match Confirmed. My heart rate slowed. This was it. The moment of truth. I opened the file. The light from the screen illuminated the truth in stark black and white. There was Brad's face staring back at me from a company ID photo. But the title under his name did not say Vice President of Strategic Acquisitions. It read, Junior Associate Broker. Junior. He was an entry-level employee. A glorified intern with a license to trade but no power to decide. I scrolled down. It got worse. Or better depending on how you looked at it. Under the employment status section, the text was highlighted in red. Current status suspended. Effective date 3 days ago. Reason for suspension, pending internal investigation. Suspected misappropriation of corporate assets. Unauthorized use of company credit cards. I almost laughed out loud. He was not just a liar. He was a thief. And not even a good one. He was currently suspended from his job for stealing from the very company he was bragging about running. He wasn't closing $50 million mergers. He was probably frantically trying to cover his tracks before the legal department filed charges. That explained the desperation. That explained the need to marry into a family he thought had money. He needed a lifeline. He needed cash to pay back what he had stolen before the police got involved. He was hunting for a victim, and he had chosen my sister. I looked up from the phone. Brad was still talking, gesturing with his fork, as he explained to my brother-in-law why traditional savings accounts were for suckers. He looked so confident, so untouchable. He had no idea that his entire life had just been dissected and laid bare on a screen beneath the table. I locked the phone and slipped it back into my pocket. The fear I had felt earlier, the old childhood anxiety of being the disappointment, evaporated instantly. It was replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I was no longer Simone the scapegoat daughter. I was Simone the auditor. And I had found the discrepancy. I reached for my water glass. My hand was steady. I took a long, slow sip, letting the cool liquid wash away the taste of their insults. I lowered the glass and looked at Brad. I let my eyes travel over his face, studying him not as a family member, but as a target. The warmth left my expression. The polite deference vanished. My eyes narrowed slightly, sharpening into a gaze that had made grown men cry in deposition rooms. I was not enduring this dinner anymore. I was hunting. And I had just spotted the kill shot. Just as I was processing the fact that the man sitting across from me was a suspended junior broker facing criminal charges, my mother decided it was the perfect moment to destroy the last piece of my happiness. She cleared her throat loudly, tapping her fork against her wineglass to demand the table's full attention. Her eyes were bright with a manic sort of excitement, the kind that usually preceded a decision that would ruin my life. "Since we are all here together," she announced, her voice trembling slightly with greed, "I have some wonderful news. Your father and I have finally made a decision about your grandmother's old house in the suburbs. We are going to sell it." The air left my lungs. My heart stopped beating for a terrifying second. That house was not just a pile of bricks and mortar. It was my sanctuary. It was the place where my grandmother had taught me to read, where she had encouraged me to be smart instead of just pretty. It was the only place in my childhood where I had felt safe and valued. And it was supposed to be mine. "You cannot do that," I said, my voice rising an octave. "Grandma promised that house to me. She told everyone. She wanted me to have it to store my book collection and build a library. It was her dying wish, Mom. You know that." Verna waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. "Oh, grow up, Simone. Promises do not pay the bills. And neither do dusty old books. Your grandmother was sentimental and old. She did not understand the value of assets. That house is sitting there rotting away, filled with your useless paperbacks while the market is at an all-time high. I had it appraised last week. Do you know what it is worth?" I stared at her, feeling the blood drain from my face. She had gone behind my back. She had let strangers walk through my grandmother's home, valuing memories by the square foot. $300,000, she declared triumphantly, slamming her hand on the table. $300,000, Simone. That is real money. That is life-changing money. And you want me to keep it locked up just so you can hoard books like some kind of hermit? It is selfish. It is childish. And I am not going to let your sentimental nonsense hold this family back anymore. But it is the only thing she left me, I whispered, the fight draining out of me. She left Ebony the jewelry. She left you the insurance money. All I asked for was the house. And look what you have done with it, my mother snapped. Nothing. It just sits there. Well, I am the executor, and I am making an executive decision. The house goes on the market Monday. The papers are already drawn up. We are cashing out. Ebony clapped her hands delightedly. That is amazing, Mom. Think of what we can do with $300,000. We can finally renovate the kitchen. We can go to Europe. Brad grinned, leaning back in his chair. That is a smart move, Verna. Real estate is illiquid. You need cash to make power moves. You are thinking like a winner. I looked at them, circling the carcass of my grandmother's legacy like vultures. They saw dollar signs. I saw the only home I had ever known being sold to the highest bidder. My mother did not care about my heart. She did not care about promises. She only cared about the $300,000 and whatever flashy disaster she was planning to fund with it. I gripped my water glass so hard I thought it might shatter. They were taking everything, but they did not know I had the power to take it all back, and I was about to use it. I looked at my mother across the table, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "Why do you need $300,000 right now, Mom? You have your pension. You have the house in Atlanta. Why sell Grandma's legacy in such a rush? Is there debt I do not know about? Are you in trouble?" Verna smiled a smile that was too wide, too bright, and entirely too naive. She pointed a manicured finger across the table at Brad, who was picking his teeth with a toothpick. "It is not about needing money, Simone. It is about multiplying it. We are not thinking small anymore. Brad has offered us the opportunity of a lifetime. An opportunity that people like you could never even dream of accessing." Brad leaned back, looking smug, his eyes glittering with something that looked suspiciously like relief. Verna continued, her voice dropping to a hushed reverence. "Brad told us about an exclusive internal investment program at Apex Capital. It is usually only for senior executives and ultra-high net worth individuals. The buy-in is usually $5 million. But because he is the vice president, and because he loves Ebony so much, he is willing to make an exception. He can get us in through the back door." She leaned in closer, her eyes gleaming with greed. "He guarantees a 200% return in just 3 months. 200%, Simone. Do the math. That $300,000 from the house will turn into nearly $1 million by Christmas. We will be set for life. I will finally be able to live the way I deserve. I felt a cold chill wash over me that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. 200% in 3 months. Guaranteed. That was not investing. That was a fairy tale. That was the opening line of every Ponzi scheme indictment I had ever read. In the legitimate financial world, nobody guaranteed returns like that. Not Warren Buffett. Not the best hedge funds in New York. The only people who promised 200% returns were con artists trying to close a mark before the police arrived. "And how exactly does this investment work?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "Do you write a check to Apex Capital? Do you sign a contract with their legal department? Do you get a prospectus?" Brad laughed, shaking his head as if I were a slow child asking a stupid question. "No, no, Simone. That takes too long. By the time the corporate paperwork clears, the market window is closed. This is high-frequency algorithmic trading. It moves in milliseconds." Verna writes the check directly to me. I deposit it into my personal trading account, which is linked to the firm's private server. I trade it for her using my clearance, and then I cut her a check for the profits, minus a small management fee, of course. It is faster, it is cleaner. It is how the real money moves in the big leagues. I looked at my mother expecting to see skepticism, expecting her to realize that handing $300,000 to a man she met 2 months ago was insanity. Instead, I saw blind faith. She nodded eagerly. "Exactly. Brad is going to handle everything personally. I just give him the money and he makes us rich. It is a blessing, Simone. A blessing you are too cynical to understand." The puzzle pieces clicked together with a deafening snap in my mind. Brad was not investing anything. He was suspended. He likely had a massive debt to the company or the authorities that he needed to pay back immediately to avoid prison. He was going to take my grandmother's house money and pour it into the black hole of his own financial crimes. He was literally robbing my mother to pay for his freedom. And she was handing him the knife to cut her own throat. Ebony clapped her hands together like a child waiting for dessert, her eyes glittering with a greed that was almost frightening to behold. "Oh my God!" she squealed, leaning across the table toward me. Her face flushed with excitement. "Simone, you have to stop being so negative. You are always trying to ruin everything with your questions and your doubts. Can't you see what a huge opportunity this is? Mom is finally going to get the life she deserves. We all are. And the best part is, the profits are going to pay for my wedding." She turned to Brad, her gaze adoring and hungry at the same time. "Brad and I have been talking about it, and we are going to have the wedding of the century. We are talking destination. Maybe Lake Como or Santorini. I want a custom Galia Lahav gown. I want orchids flown in from Thailand. I want a 10-tier cake. And Mom said if this investment pays out like you promised, she will cover the whole thing. $200,000 minimum. It is going to be on the cover of Essence magazine, Simone. People will be talking about it for years." I looked at my sister, really looked at her. I saw the calculation behind the smile. She did not care about the risk. She did not care about the house. She did not care that our grandmother had worked for 30 years as a nurse to buy that property, saving every penny so her family would have an asset. All Ebony saw was a party. All she saw was a chance to be the center of attention funded by the liquidation of our heritage. "And you," Simone Ebony continued, her voice sharpening into a scolding tone, "you need to stop being so selfish. You always make everything about you. Oh, Grandma promised me the house. Oh, I want to build a library. Who cares about your dusty old books? We are talking about building generational wealth here. We are talking about elevating the family name. If you cannot contribute financially, if you are going to be broke and useless, then the least you can do is get out of the way. Do not block our blessing just because you are jealous that you did not find a man like Brad." My mother nodded solemnly, reaching over to squeeze Ebony's hand. "She is right, Simone. Sometimes you have to make sacrifices for the greater good. Selling that house is a small price to pay for your sister's happiness and our financial freedom. You need to learn to be a team player. You have always been so individualistic, so focused on your own little world. It is time to grow up and think about the family for once. I felt a cold stone settle in the pit of my stomach. It was not just ignorance. It was malice. They were willing to burn down my sanctuary, my inheritance, my grandmother's legacy, just to throw a party for a man they barely knew. They were not just foolish. They were cruel. They looked at me and saw an obstacle to their greed. They looked at Brad and saw a winning lottery ticket. They were so blinded by the promise of easy money and flashy weddings that they could not see they were standing on a trap door. And the man holding the lever was smiling right at them. I looked at Ebony's manicured nails tapping on the table, impatient for her payday. I looked at my mother's face, hard with determination to sell out her own mother's memory. I realized then that I owed them nothing. Not protection, not warning, not mercy. They had made their choice. They had chosen the illusion of wealth over the reality of family, and now they were going to pay the price. I took a sip of water. The ice rattled against the glass. "Okay," I said softly. "I hear you, loud and clear." I took a deep breath, knowing it was futile, but the auditor in me, the daughter who once loved her mother, could not let them walk off a cliff without one final scream. "Mom," I said, my voice low and urgent, "please listen to me. Writing a personal check to a private account for a corporate investment is not standard practice. It is a massive red flag. Internal investment programs have prospectuses, they have legal contracts, they have insurance. If you give him that money without a paper trail, you have no protection. If the market turns, or if something happens to Brad, that money is gone. Do you have a single piece of paper guaranteeing this 200% return?" Bam! Brad slammed his hand onto the table for the second time tonight, but this time it was with the force of a man whose livelihood was threatened. The wine in the glasses sloshed over the rims, staining the white tablecloth red like fresh blood. "Are you questioning my integrity?" he shouted, his face turning a mottled shade of purple. "I am a vice president at Apex Capital. I manage portfolios worth more than your entire life earnings. I am doing your family a favor, a massive favor. I am opening a door for you that is usually locked to people like you, and you have the audacity to sit there and ask me for paperwork." He stood up, towering over the table, his finger pointing accusingly at my face. "I know what this is. You are jealous. You are eating your heart out because you do not have $300,000 to invest. You are stuck in your little dead-end job driving your little Honda, and you cannot stand seeing your sister and your mother winning. You want them to stay poor so you can feel better about your own failure. You are pathetic, Simone. Absolutely pathetic." My mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest. She looked at Brad with wide, fearful eyes, terrified that the golden goose was about to fly away. Then she turned on me with a ferocity that startled me. Simone Verna screeched, her voice shrill and ugly. "How dare you? How dare you speak to a man of his stature like that? You are embarrassing me. You are embarrassing this entire family. Brad is a blessing. He is a nobleman who stepped down to help us, and you are treating him like a common criminal." She grabbed her linen napkin and threw it at me. It hit my chest and fluttered to the floor. "You are a bitter, envious little girl. You always have been. You cannot stand to see Ebony happy. You cannot stand to see me successful. If Brad walks away from this deal because of your disrespect, I will never forgive you. Do you hear me? Never. You will be dead to me. Now apologize. Apologize to him right now and pray he is gracious enough to forgive your insolence." I looked at my mother, her face twisted in a snarl of greed and misplaced loyalty. She was willing to disown me to protect a con artist she met 8 weeks ago just because he promised her a pot of gold. She called me envious while I sat on a fortune she could not comprehend. She called me a failure while I held the power to destroy the man she worshipped. The last tether connecting me to my childhood hope of acceptance finally snapped. I did not feel sad anymore. I felt nothing but a cold, professional detachment. The time for warnings was over. I looked at Brad, who was still standing there, chest heaving, waiting for my submission. I looked at my mother, who was trembling with rage. "No," I said calmly, picking the napkin up from the floor and placing it on the table. "I will not apologize. But do not worry. You are going to get exactly what you deserve." The waiter arrived with a silver tray bearing chocolate soufflés, but Brad waved him away with a sharp gesture. He knew that the tension at the table was suffocating after my mother threatened to disown me, but he also knew that nothing smoothed over a family fracture like a display of obscene wealth. He stood up, pushing his chair back with a scrape against the floor that drew the attention of the entire restaurant. He smoothed his jacket, took a deep breath, and dropped to one knee, right there on the plush carpet. The restaurant went silent. My mother let out a strangled sound of pure ecstasy, her hands flying to her mouth to stifle a sob. She kicked me under the table hard, a physical command to wipe the look of disgust off my face. Ebony looked down at him, her eyes wide, not with love, but with the anticipation of a viral moment. She already had her phone out, the camera app open and recording. She adjusted her hair with one hand while keeping the lens focused on Brad with the other. Brad reached into his pocket and pulled out a box. It was deep crimson velvet the size of a baseball. He snapped it open, and the light from the crystal chandelier seemed to get sucked into the stone sitting inside. It was a diamond. A massive pear-shaped diamond that looked heavy enough to break a finger. It was gaudy. It was excessive. It was exactly what Ebony wanted. Ebony screamed. It was a high, piercing shriek that made the diners at the next table jump. "Oh my God!" she yelled, her voice cracking. "Oh my God, is that real?" She held her phone steady, live streaming the moment to her followers, making sure the ring was perfectly framed in the shot. She was performing happiness for an audience of strangers. Brad beamed, looking up at her with the confidence of a man who owned the world. "Ebony Blackwell," he announced, his voice booming, so that everyone from the host stand to the kitchen could hear him. "You are the most beautiful woman in Atlanta. You deserve the best. This is not just a ring. This is a statement. This is a flawless 3-carat diamond custom set in platinum. I paid $85,000 for this rock this afternoon because nothing less is worthy of my queen. $85,000. The number hung in the air like a mesmerizing spell. My mother looked like she might faint from joy. "85,000, she whispered, turning to me with a look of vicious triumph. "Simone, do you hear that? $85,000. That is more than you make in 2 years. Look at what a real man provides." Brad slipped the ring onto Ebony's finger. It was too big, sliding loosely to the side, but she curled her hand into a fist to hold it in place, turning it this way and that to catch the light for her camera. "Yes," she screamed. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The restaurant erupted in polite applause. People were smiling, cooing at the romantic scene. They saw a successful businessman proposing to his beautiful girlfriend. I saw something else entirely. I saw a crime scene. $85,000. The number was specific, it was exact, and thanks to the file on my phone, I knew exactly whose money had paid for it. While the rest of the table was lost in a frenzy of admiration over the diamond, I slowly lowered my gaze to my lap. My phone screen was dimmed to avoid attracting attention, but the information displayed on it burned with the intensity of a flare. A new notification had just arrived from the secure Vanguard Risk portal. It was the real-time transaction report I had requested earlier, specifically flagging any high-value purchases made on Apex Capital corporate accounts within the last 6 hours. My lead forensic accountant had prioritized the search, and the result was staring me right in the face in undeniable high definition. I tapped the screen to expand the line item. There it was. The digital footprint of a crime committed in broad daylight. The transaction was time-stamped at 16:30 hours today, just barely 2 hours before we sat down for this dinner. The merchant listed was Tiffany & Co., located at Phipps Plaza. The amount was exactly $85,000 and 0 cents, matching Brad's boast down to the penny. But it was the payment method that sealed his fate. The charge had not been made on a personal debit card or a private bank account. It was charged to an American Express Centurion card, issued to Apex Capital Holdings. I felt a cold rush of adrenaline. He had used the company credit card. He had literally walked into a jewelry store and swiped a corporate expense card, meant for client dinners and business travel, to buy an engagement ring. It was not just unethical, it was felony embezzlement. He was stealing from his employer to buy my sister. I looked up at Brad. He was back in his seat now, accepting a glass of champagne from the waiter, his chest puffed out with pride. He looked so confident, so untouchable. He truly believed he had pulled it off. He thought he could just swipe the card, dazzle my family with the rock, and figure out how to cover his tracks later. He was probably counting on the fact that compliance officers usually took weeks to reconcile monthly expense reports. He did not realize that the head of compliance for the parent company was sitting 3 feet away from him, watching him drink vintage champagne. I shifted my gaze to the ring on Ebony's finger. It sparkled violently under the crystal chandelier, casting tiny rainbows across the white tablecloth. It was beautiful. It was flawless. And it was stolen property. My sister was not wearing a symbol of eternal love. She was wearing a grand larceny charge wrapped in platinum. She was flashing evidence of a crime to her Instagram followers, unaware that the police could confiscate it right off her hand. The realization of his plan hit me with sickening clarity. He was not just reckless. He was calculating. He knew the bill for the ring would come due at the end of the month. That was why he was pushing my mother so hard to sell the house. He needed that $300,000 not to invest, but to pay off the corporate card balance before the auditors noticed the missing funds. He was going to use my grandmother's legacy to cover his theft. He was going to wash his crime with my family's money. I took a slow sip of water to hide the expression on my face. It was the look of a hunter who just realized the trap had snapped shut. I had him. I had the time, the place, the amount, and the card number. I had the smoking gun. Enjoy the applause, Brad, I thought. It is the last time you are going to hear it. Brad was glowing with the rush of his own performance. He looked down at Ebony, who was still admiring the stolen ring, and then he turned his gaze to me. The look in his eyes was not just triumphant, it was cruel. He wanted to make sure I understood my place in this new hierarchy he was building. "Look at that, Simone," he said, pointing a finger at the velvet box sitting open on the table. "Take a good look, because that is as close as you are ever going to get to something this valuable. You could work your little data entry job for the next 50 years, and you still would not be able to afford the empty box this ring came in. It is sad, really." He leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest. "But do not worry. Family looks out for family, right? When Ebony and I move into our estate in Buckhead, we are going to need help. Good help is hard to find these days. Maybe I can hire you. We will need someone to scrub the floors and take out the trash. I will even pay you double whatever minimum wage you are making now. It will be a step up for you." The table erupted. It was not a polite chuckle. It was a roar of laughter. Ebony threw her head back, her hand clutching Brad's arm as if he were the funniest man alive. Even my brother-in-law cracked a smile. They thought it was a joke. They thought the idea of me, the woman who secretly paid their bills scrubbing their toilets, was hilarious. My mother wiped a tear from her eye, but it was not a tear of shame for her daughter's humiliation. It was a tear of joy. "Oh, Brad, you are terrible," she said, giggling like a schoolgirl. "But honestly, Simone, you should be grateful. Brad is offering you a future. Finally, this family is going to have the status we deserve. We are finally leveling up. No more struggling, no more pretending. We are going to be real society now." She looked at me with a mixture of pity and disdain. "Just try not to be too bitter, Simone. Your sister won. You lost. That is just the way the world works. Maybe if you had listened to me and found a man instead of burying yourself in books, you would be wearing a ring like that today. But you made your choices, And now you have to live with them. I looked at them laughing at my expense while sitting in a restaurant I could buy, and wearing clothes I paid for. They were celebrating a criminal who was about to drag them into a federal investigation. They were mocking the only person who could save them. The irony was so thick I could taste it. It tasted like blood. I am not bitter, Mom, I said, my voice cutting through the laughter like a razor blade. I am just observing. It is fascinating, really. You think you have won the lottery, but you have not even checked the ticket numbers yet. Brad stopped laughing. He narrowed his eyes, sensing a shift in the air, but unable to identify it. What is that supposed to mean? He asked, his voice dropping. Are you jealous, Simone? Just admit it. You are dying inside because your little sister beat you to the finish line. I am not jealous, Brad, I replied. I am patient, and I am very, very thorough. The laughter at the table slowly died down, replaced by the clinking of dessert spoons and the murmur of satisfied greed. My mother was busy admiring the ring on Ebony's finger, already mentally spending the money from the house sale on a wedding venue. Brad was leaning back, looking like a man who had just conquered the world. He did not know that the ground beneath his feet had already turned to quicksand. I cleared my throat, soft but distinct. The sound cut through the self-congratulatory atmosphere. So, Brad? I said, my voice casual, but carrying a new weight. I am curious. You have accomplished so much at such a young age. How long have you actually been with Apex Capital? Brad blinked, surprised that I was speaking again. He swirled his champagne, looking at me with a mix of annoyance and pity. 5 years, he said smoothly. 5 years of grinding. I started in the mailroom and worked my way up to the C-suite. I built the strategic acquisitions department from the ground up. Practically ran the place before they even gave me the title. Why do you ask, Simone? Looking for a job application? I ignored the jab. 5 years, I repeated slowly. That is a long time in finance. You must know everyone in the upper echelon then. The board members, the partners, the compliance officers. Brad nodded vigorously. Oh, absolutely. We are like a family. We have golf outings every weekend. I have the CEO on speed dial. There is not a single person at Apex I do not know on a first-name basis. Excellent, I said, leaning forward just an inch. Then you must be familiar with the new Chief Compliance Officer for the parent group. She was appointed just last month to oversee the risk management division. In the industry, they call her the Hawk, because she has a reputation for spotting irregularities from a mile away. Do you know her? The table went quiet. My mother looked confused, wondering why I was asking such specific questions. Ebony looked bored, twisting her stolen ring in the light. But Brad froze. Just for a microsecond. His eyes darted to the left, a telltale sign of a liar constructing a fabrication. He did not know who the Hawk was. He could not. Because the Hawk was a nickname given to me by the FBI agents I worked with on a racketeering case 3 years ago. It was a name whispered in boardrooms by executives who feared my audits. It was me. But Brad's ego would not let him admit ignorance. Not in front of his new fiancée. Not in front of the woman he had just belittled. He took a sip of his drink, stalling for time, and then the lie rolled off his tongue, smooth as poison. The Hawk. He chuckled, shaking his head. Oh yeah, I know her. We go way back, actually. She is a tough cookie, but we have a mutual respect. She actually consulted me on a few compliance issues when she first started. Wanted my advice on how to handle the high-value portfolios. We have lunch together all the time. She is actually a big fan of mine. I felt a cold thrill of victory. He had taken the bait. He had just claimed to be best friends with the woman sitting across from him, the woman he had spent the last 2 hours insulting. He had claimed to have lunch with a ghost, and now I was going to make him choke on it. Brad did not just take the bait, he swallowed the hook, the line, and the sinker. He threw his head back and laughed, a sound that was meant to convey casual familiarity, but only screamed desperation. The Hawk, he said, swirling his drink like he was swirling a memory. Oh yeah, I know her. We are tight. In fact, we are beyond tight. We are like family. He leaned in closer to the table, lowering his voice as if sharing a state secret. To be honest with you, Simone, she relies on me. She is great at the rules and regulations stuff, do not get me wrong. But she lacks the big picture vision. She gets bogged down in the details. So she calls me when she needs to see the forest for the trees. Just yesterday, actually, we grabbed lunch. She wanted to pick my brain about the emerging markets in Southeast Asia. She knows I have my finger on the pulse and she needed a strategy that would pass the board. I basically wrote her entire presentation for next quarter on a napkin. My mother let out a little squeal of delight. You advise the chief compliance officer, she asked, looking at Brad with eyes the size of dinner plates. Oh, Brad, you are practically running that company. Pretty much, Verna, Brad said with a shrug. Pretty much. I sat there watching him construct this alternate reality. It was fascinating in a morbid kind of way, like watching a car crash in slow motion. He was lying about having lunch with me. He was lying about advising me. Yesterday at lunch, I was not at a power lunch with a junior broker. I was in a windowless conference room eating a kale salad out of Tupperware while reviewing forensic bank records for a completely different embezzlement case. I had never spoken to this man in my life. I decided to tighten the noose. I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hand, my eyes wide with feigned interest. Wow, I said. That is incredible. I have heard she can be very intimidating. It must be nice to have that kind of rapport with her. Where did you guys go? Brad waved a hand airily. Oh, you know, just a little spot downtown. Chops. The usual power crowd. Chops, I repeated. Nice. And what did she have? I am just curious what a woman of that power eats for lunch. Brad did not even hesitate. He did not blink. He did not pause to consider that maybe, just maybe, he should be vague. He went for the alpha male fantasy. Steak, he declared, slamming his fist into his open palm for emphasis. A massive bone in ribeye. Rare. Bloody. She is a carnivore, that one. She eats red meat like a man. She told me it keeps her aggression up. She finished the whole thing and then ordered a whiskey. She is my kind of woman. The world seemed to stop spinning for a second. I felt a cold, hard smile spread across my face. It was the smile of the executioner raising the axe. Steak. Rare steak. I had been a strict vegan for 12 years. I had not touched a piece of meat since graduate school. My dietary restrictions were famous at Vanguard Risk. I was the woman who brought her own hummus to catered events. I was the woman who made the CEO change the company lunch menu to include plant-based options. Everyone who actually knew the hawk knew she did not eat anything with a face. Brad had just painted a picture of me, tearing into a bloody ribeye. He had just proven beyond a shadow of a doubt to anyone who actually knew me that he was a complete and total fraud. He was not my friend. He was not my advisor. He was a stranger telling stories to impress a girlfriend he was trying to rob. He smiled at me, smug and satisfied, thinking he had put me in my place with his tales of high society dining. He thought he had won. He did not know he had just signed his own death warrant. I stared at the piece of gristle stuck in Brad's teeth as he grinned about the imaginary steak. That was it. The final nail in his coffin. He had turned me into a caricature to feed his ego, and in doing so he had given me the perfect opening to destroy him. I did not say a word. I did not correct him about my veganism. I did not point out that whiskey gives me a migraine. I just nodded slowly, as if impressed by his masculine conquest of the corporate food chain. Under the table, my hand moved with lethal precision. I unlocked my phone and opened the priority channel to the Vanguard security team and looped in David, the actual CEO of Apex Capital. My thumbs flew across the screen, typing the command that would end Brad's life as he knew it. Authorization code, Hawk90. Activate protocol code red immediately. Target Bradley Cooper is currently at Le Ciel restaurant in Atlanta. Subject is actively utilizing stolen corporate assets for personal high-value transactions. Flag all accounts associated with his employee ID for immediate freeze. Notify local law enforcement and authorize asset seizure. Execute. I hit send. The message whooshed away into the digital ether, carrying with it the power to bankrupt a man in seconds. I watched the delivery receipt turn from sent to delivered to read. Then I saw the typing bubbles appear. David was awake, and David was furious. I did not wait for his reply. I knew what it would be. I slid the phone out from under the table and placed it face down on the white tablecloth next to my water glass. It sat there like a black monolith, silent and terrifying. The table was buzzing with excitement. Ebony was taking selfies with the ring, holding her hand up to the light to maximize the sparkle. My mother was practically vibrating with joy, already planning the engagement party in her head. Brad was signaling the waiter for another bottle of champagne, his face flushed with the intoxication of his own lies. They were celebrating a victory that was actually a funeral. I folded my hands in my lap and leaned back in my chair. The countdown had begun. It would take the bank's security algorithms less than 60 seconds to process the freeze order. It would take the credit card terminal another 30 seconds to receive the decline code. And it would take the police about 5 minutes to arrive from the precinct down the street. I watched the second hand on the grandfather clock in the corner. Tick past the 12, tick, tick, tick. Enjoy your champagne, Brad. Enjoy the adoration of my foolish family, because in about 2 minutes, your credit card is going to turn into a useless piece of plastic and your carriage is going to turn back into a pumpkin. And I am going to be the one holding the match that burns it all down. The show was about to start, and I had the best seat in the house. Brad wiped a bead of sweat from his upper lip with the back of his hand, a nervous tick that betrayed the cool facade he was trying so hard to maintain. Despite the champagne and the adoration of my mother, he was vibrating with a frantic energy. He checked his fake Patek Philippe watch for the third time in 5 minutes. He leaned across the table toward my mother, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that was meant to sound confidential, but just sounded desperate. "Mom," he said, skipping the pleasantries, "we need to talk about the house transfer. I just got a text from the trading desk in Tokyo. The window on this investment opportunity is closing faster than we thought. The markets are volatile right now. If we do not get that capital into the system within the next 24 hours, we are going to miss the surge. We need to move on this tonight." My mother looked up from her admiring gaze at Ebony's ring, her eyes wide with alarm. "Tonight?" she asked. "But I thought we had until Monday. I was going to call the lawyer in the morning to draft the transfer documents." Brad shook his head vigorously, his eyes darting around the room as if checking for exits. "Lawyers take too long, Verna. They will drag this out with paperwork and fees, and by the time they are done, the opportunity will be gone. We need to be agile. We need to be aggressive. Did you bring the deed like I asked? We can sign a quitclaim deed right here at the table. I have a notary who owes me a favor coming by the hotel later. We can bypass the red tape and get that money working for us by midnight." My mother smiled a conspiratorial grin that made her look 10 years younger and infinitely more foolish. She reached down into her oversized designer tote bag. "I knew you would say that, Brad," she said triumphantly. "That is why I came prepared. I did not want to take any chances with our future." She pulled out a thick manila envelope. The corners were worn, and I recognized it immediately. It was the envelope my grandmother used to keep in her fireproof safe. It contained the original deed to the family home, the property survey, and the title insurance. It was the physical embodiment of 3 generations of struggle and success. I brought everything, she whispered, sliding the envelope across the white tablecloth toward him. "The deed is in there. I am ready to sign it over to you whenever you say. I trust you, Brad. You are family now." Brad's eyes locked onto that envelope like a starving wolf spotting a wounded deer. His hand shot out to grab it, his fingers twitching with greed. I watched the exchange in slow motion, the way his shoulders dropped in relief, the way he licked his lips, and suddenly the full scope of his plan hit me with the force of a physical blow. He was not investing that money, he was not trading on the Tokyo exchange, he was cashing out. He had maxed out the corporate card on the ring, knowing it would buy him just enough time and trust to get his hands on a liquid asset. He was going to take that deed, find a hard money lender or a shady pawn shop and trade my grandmother's legacy for quick cash. Then he was going to run. He was going to disappear into the night, leaving my sister with a stolen ring and my mother homeless. He wasn't building a future. He was financing his escape, and he was planning to do it tonight, right now, before the check for dinner even arrived. The manila envelope slid across the white tablecloth with a dry hiss that sounded like a snake moving through grass. It was the sound of my childhood being sold for scrap. It was the sound of my grandmother's sweat and tears being traded for a lie. Brad's hand was reaching out, his fingers spread wide like a claw. I saw the triumph in his eyes. He thought he had won. He thought the deal was done. He was already spending the money in his head, buying his ticket to a non-extradition country and leaving my mother with nothing but dust. But he forgot one thing. I was sitting right there, and I was faster. I did not think. I did not calculate probabilities or weigh the social consequences. I just reacted. My hand shot across the table, blurring with speed. I slammed my palm down on top of the envelope, pinning it to the table just inches from his fingertips. The impact shook the silverware and sent a wineglass wobbling dangerously. Brad flinched, pulling his hand back as if he had been burned. I did not hesitate. I curled my fingers around the thick paper and yanked it toward me, pulling it off the table and clutching it tightly against my chest. The deed was safe. For now. The silence that followed was short and violent. Then my mother screamed. It was a guttural, animalistic sound of pure rage. She stood up so fast her chair tipped over backward, crashing onto the floor with a deafening bang that stopped conversations 5 tables away. "You little witch!" she shrieked, her face twisting into a mask of pure hatred. "What do you think you are doing? That is not yours. Put it back. You are trying to steal our future. You ungrateful, miserable wretch. Give it to him. Give it to him right now." She reached across the table, her manicured nails clawing at the air, trying to snatch the envelope from my grip. I leaned back, protecting it with my body. "You are ruining everything," she yelled, tears of frustration springing to her eyes. "You are jealous. You are sick. You want us to be poor forever. How dare you touch that? I am your mother, and I command you to put it back." Brad did not scream. He did something scarier. He stood up slowly, his eyes locking onto the envelope in my arms. The charming businessman mask fell away, completely revealing the desperate cornered animal beneath. He was large, he was angry, and he was coming for me. He walked around the edge of the table, ignoring the startled waiters who were rushing over to see what the commotion was. He loomed over me, his shadow falling across my face. "Give me the deed, Simone," he said, his voice low and threatening. "I am not playing games with you. That is my property. Your mother gave it to me. Hand it over before I make you hand it over. Do not make me create a scene. You do not want to see what happens when I lose my temper." I looked up at him. I saw the vein throbbing in his forehead. I saw the clenched fists at his sides. He was ready to get physical. He was desperate enough to assault a woman in a 5-star restaurant, because without that envelope he was a dead man walking. My mother was cheering him on, encouraging him to take it by force. "Get it, Brad," she urged. "Do not let her steal our blessing. Take it from her. She has no right." I gripped the envelope tighter. I could feel the stiff paper through the fabric of my blazer. It felt like armor. It felt like my grandmother was standing right there behind me, holding my shoulders. I was not afraid of him. I was not afraid of his threats or his size or his fake status. I was the wall he was about to crash into. I did not flinch. I did not blink. I sat there with my grandmother's legacy pressed against my heart and watched the man who tried to steal it unravel. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving with the exertion of his own rage. He was inches from my face, close enough that I could see the dilated pupils and the sheen of sweat on his upper lip. He wanted to hit me. I could see the impulse twitching in his right hand. He wanted to take what he thought he was owed, but something in my eyes stopped him. It was not fear. It was certainty. "You do not need this envelope, Brad," I said, my voice steady and cool like the air before a storm. "You are fighting so hard for a lifeline, but you do not realize you have already drowned." You do not need the $300,000. You do not need to pay off the corporate card, because where you are going, money does not matter. You are not going to need cash for a very long time." He froze. The aggressive posture faltered. He stepped back half an inch, his brow furrowing as he tried to process what I was saying. The arrogance that had fueled him all night, the shield of his fake title and his stolen suit flickered. For the first time I saw the real Brad, the scared little boy who played dress-up in his father's clothes and hoped no one would notice they did not fit. He looked at me and he saw something he did not understand. He saw a woman who knew his secrets. "What are you talking about?" he snarled, but the bite was gone from his voice. "You are crazy. You are just trying to scare me. You think you can intimidate me with your cryptic nonsense. I am a vice president. I run this town. Give me the deed, Simone, or I swear I will make sure you never work in this city again." He was bluffing. He was doubling down on a hand he had already lost. He looked at my mother, expecting her to jump in to scream at me to force my hand. But even Verna was silent now. She was looking back and forth between us, sensing the shift in power, but unable to comprehend it. She saw her golden goose hesitating before her scapegoat daughter, and her world was tilting on its axis. I stood up slowly. I kept the envelope tucked under one arm and smoothed my blazer with the other. I did not back away. I stepped into his space. I forced him to look up at me. "I am not trying to scare you, Brad," I said. "I am informing you. You think you are the predator at this table. You think we are just sheep waiting to be sheared. But you made a mistake. You did not check the credentials of the people you were trying to rob. You walked into a lion's den wearing a meat suit." He laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. "You are delusional," he spat. "You are a nobody, a data entry clerk. You are nothing." I smiled. It was the same smile I gave to executives right before I handed over the evidence that sent them to federal prison. It was a smile of finality. "I am the auditor," I whispered, "and your books are closed." He opened his mouth to scream, to lunge, to do something violent, but the sound of sirens cutting through the evening air outside stopped him cold. He turned his head toward the window, his eyes widening. The flashing blue lights reflected in the glass, illuminating the fear that was finally taking hold. He looked back at me, and in that moment he knew. He did not know how, and he did not know who, but he knew it was over. The waiter approached the table with the silent efficiency of an undertaker, holding the black leather bill folder in both hands. The arrival of the check broke the tension momentarily, giving Brad a lifeline to cling to. He snatched the folder from the waiter's grip before it could even touch the tablecloth. He flipped it open with a dramatic snap, his eyes scanning the total. He let out a low whistle that was meant to sound impressed, but just sounded vulgar. $5,400, he announced loudly, making sure my mother and sister heard every syllable. "Not bad for a light dinner. That is a decent Tuesday night tab." He looked at my mother Verna, who was staring at him with her mouth slightly open. "See, Verna," he said, puffing out his chest, "this is the difference between surviving and thriving. Most people would have a heart attack looking at this number. To me, it is just the cost of doing business. It is the price of admission to the good life. And tonight, admission is on me." He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a wallet made of alligator skin. He opened it slowly, savoring the moment like he was drawing a weapon. He bypassed the stack of cash. He bypassed the gold and platinum cards. He went straight to the back slot and pulled out a card that was heavy and black. It was an American Express Centurion card, the black card, the mythical piece of titanium that signaled unlimited spending power. He held it up, catching the light so the Centurion logo gleamed. Then with a flick of his wrist, he tossed it onto the silver tray. The heavy metal card hit the metal tray with a loud, distinct clatter that rang out like a gunshot in the quiet dining room. It was the sound of ultimate arrogance. "Run it," Brad commanded the waiter, not even looking at him, "and add 30% for the tip. I am in a good mood tonight. Do not bring me any receipts to sign. I do not need the paper trail. Just keep the change." The waiter bowed slightly and picked up the tray, looking at the card with reverence. Yes, sir. Right away, sir. Brad turned his head slowly to look at me. The fear I had seen in his eyes moments ago, when I confronted him about the deed, was gone, buried under a fresh layer of bravado purchased with stolen money. He pointed a finger at the black card retreating on the waiter's tray. Take a good look, Simone, he sneered. That right there is what success looks like. That is what real power feels like. You sit there clutching your grandmother's dusty old deed trying to feel important. But at the end of the day, I am the one paying the bill. I am the one feeding your family. I am the one making things happen. He leaned forward, his eyes cold and hard. Learn from this, darling. Take notes. Maybe if you stopped being so jealous and started paying attention, you might actually get somewhere in life. This is how the big dogs eat. Watch and learn, Simone. Watch and learn. I watched him gloat. I watched him preen. I watched him dig his own grave with a titanium shovel. He thought he was teaching me a lesson about wealth. He did not realize he was teaching a masterclass in self-destruction. I knew that card. I knew the account number associated with it. I knew it belonged to the CEO's discretionary fund, and I knew that 20 minutes ago I had personally authorized the bank to flag it as stolen. I folded my hands on the table and offered him a smile that was sharp enough to cut glass. I am watching Brad. I said, my voice soft and deadly. Believe me, I am learning so much. The waiter returned to the table, but the spring was gone from his step. He was not carrying the silver tray anymore. He was holding the black leather folder in both hands, clutching it against his chest like a shield. He stopped a few feet away from Brad and cleared his throat. The sound was small, but in the sudden quiet of our table, it sounded like a gavel coming down. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot, his eyes darting nervously between Brad and the manager, who was now standing watchfully by the host stand. I am terribly sorry, sir. The waiter said, his voice lowered to a discreet murmur meant to save face. But there seems to be a problem with the card. The transaction was declined. Brad did not just freeze. He exploded. He dropped his fork onto his plate with a clatter and whipped his head around to glare at the young man. Declined. He repeated the word, coming out like a bark of laughter. You must be joking. That is an American Express Centurion. It does not get declined. It has an unlimited spending ceiling. You obviously swiped it wrong. Go back there and run it again. And this time, try to do it correctly. The waiter did not move. He did not take the folder back to the terminal. He took a small step back, his face flushing pink with embarrassment, but his instructions were clear. Sir, I cannot run it again, he said, his voice trembling slightly but firm. The machine gave us a specific error code. It is a code 10. That means the card has been reported stolen and the issuer has ordered us to confiscate it immediately. Confiscated. The word hung in the air over the table, heavy and suffocating. My mother gasped, clutching her napkin to her chest. Stolen, she whispered, looking at Brad with wide, terrified eyes. Brad, what is he talking about? Tell him it is a mistake. Brad stood up, knocking his chair back against the wall. His face turned a deep, dangerous shade of crimson. The vein in his forehead began to throb. You are out of your mind, he shouted loud enough for the entire dining room to hear. You are accusing me of theft. Do you know who I am? I am a vice president at Apex Capital. That card has a $1 million limit. I spend more in a week than you make in a decade. He jabbed a finger in the waiter's face, his entire body shaking with a mix of rage and panic. You are going to give me my card back right now, and you are going to run it again. If you do not, I will have your job. I will buy this restaurant just to fire you. Do you hear me? Run it again. The waiter looked terrified, shrinking back from Brad's aggression, but he did not produce the card. I am sorry, sir, he stammered. I cannot return the card. It is bank policy. It is already in the lockbox. Brad slammed his fist onto the table, making the wine glasses jump. This is insanity, he roared. It is a glitch, a computer error. My finances are impeccable. Give me the terminal. I will punch the numbers in myself. I sat there quietly watching the meltdown. I took a sip of my water. It was not a glitch. It was not an error. It was the precise, efficient work of the fraud algorithm I had helped design. The trap had snapped shut, and the animal was thrashing against the bars. He was shouting about million-dollar limits and buying restaurants, but everyone in the room could see the truth. He was a fraud, he was broke, and he was caught. Just as Brad was winding up for another scream at the terrified waiter, a sound cut through the tension like a knife. It was his phone ringing. It was a loud, obnoxious ringtone, something that sounded like an air horn, which fit him perfectly. He snatched the device from his pocket and looked at the screen. A wave of relief washed over his face, so potent it was almost palpable. He let out a harsh, triumphant laugh and turned the screen toward me and the waiter. "See," he crowed, shaking the phone in the air. "It is the bank. It is the concierge service. I told you it was a mistake. They are calling to apologize. They are calling to tell me they fired the idiot who froze my card. You are all going to look so stupid in about 10 seconds. He tapped the green answer button, and with a flourish of pure arrogance, he hit the speakerphone icon. He wanted the whole restaurant to hear his vindication. He wanted everyone to hear the bank begging for his forgiveness. He held the phone up like a trophy in the center of the table. "Yes, this is Brad," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Go ahead and explain to these people what a massive mistake you have made." There was a split second of static, and then a voice exploded from the tiny speaker. It was not a polite customer service representative. It was a roar of pure, unadulterated rage, and it was a voice I recognized instantly. It was David, the CEO of Apex Capital. Bradley, the voice screamed at a volume that made my mother jump in her seat. "Where the hell are you?" Brad froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The smug grin began to slide off his face like melting wax. "David," he stammered, his voice squeaking. "David, I can explain. I am just at a client dinner." "Shut up," David bellowed, cutting him off. "Do not lie to me. I have the transaction report right here in front of me. I am looking at an $85,000 charge at Tiffany & Co., followed by a declined transaction at a restaurant called Le Ciel. Since when does Apex Capital authorize engagement rings for its junior brokers? Since when do you have permission to raid the corporate coffers to fund your personal life?" The restaurant had gone deathly silent. Every fork stopped moving. Every conversation died. The only sound in the room was the furious voice emanating from the phone in Brad's trembling hand. "I swear, David, it is a misunderstanding," Brad whispered, beads of sweat popping out on his forehead. "I was going to pay it back on Monday. It was just a bridge loan." "You are a thief," Bradley David shouted. "You are a common criminal. You think this is a loan. This is embezzlement. This is grand larceny, and you are done. Do you hear me? You are fired, effective immediately. Do not bother coming to the office to clear out your desk. Security is already bagging your things, and do not think you are going to just walk away from this." Brad was shaking now, his hand vibrating so hard the phone rattled against the table. "David, please," he begged, tears welling in his eyes. "Please do not do this. My fiancé is right here." "I do not care who is there," David roared, delivering the final blow. "I have already called the FBI, Bradley. They are on their way to your location right now. I hope the ring was worth it, because it is going to cost you 10 years of your life." The line went dead with a sharp click. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Brad stood there holding the silent phone, his face no longer red with anger. All the blood had drained away, leaving him a pale, sickly shade of gray. He looked like a ghost. He looked like a dead man. He slowly lowered the phone to the table, his eyes wide and unfocused, staring at nothing. The facade was gone. The vice president was gone. All that was left was a thief who had just been caught by the world. Brad fumbled with the phone, his fingers slipping over the screen as he desperately tried to make the silence stop. He tapped the end call button 3 times before the screen finally went dark, cutting off the hum of the open line. But the damage was already done. The echo of David's screaming voice still hung in the air like smoke. Brad looked up, his eyes darting wildly around the room. He looked at the exit. He looked at the kitchen. He looked at my mother, who was sitting frozen in her chair with her mouth open. He looked everywhere except at me. He was vibrating with panic, the adrenaline of a man who realizes the walls are not just closing in, they are crushing him. I decided it was time to stand. I pushed my chair back slowly, the legs scraping softly against the carpet. I stood up to my full height. I reached down and buttoned my blazer, adjusting the lapels with a slow, deliberate movement. It was a gesture of armor, a gesture of business. I was no longer the sister at the dinner table. I was the prosecutor in the courtroom. I reached for my phone, which was still lying face down on the table. I picked it up and unlocked it. My movements were calm, precise, and terrifyingly steady compared to his frantic twitching. "You know, Brad," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the silent restaurant. "In my line of work we have a saying, if it is not documented, it did not happen. But if it is recorded, it is forever." He looked at me, confusion mixing with his fear. "What are you doing?" he whispered hoarsely. I held the phone up facing him. "Do you remember what you told me earlier? About my job? About the risk assessment team at Apex? You were very specific about your authority. You were very proud of how you handle compliance. Let me refresh your memory." I tapped the screen. A digital waveform appeared and the play button turned green. Suddenly, Brad's voice filled the space between us. It was clear and loud, stripped of the background noise by my phone's isolation software. "Risk assessment, please. Those guys are just stooges for me." I snap my fingers and they disappear. "I do not follow the rules, Simone. I make the rules. Rules are for poor people. I vet the auditors, they do not vet me." I hit pause. The recording stopped, but the words seemed to linger, hovering over the table like a toxic cloud. Brad's face went from gray to a sickly, translucent white. He stared at the phone as if it were a loaded gun. "That was a recording I made 45 minutes ago," I explained, my tone conversational, yet cold. "In the legal world, we call that a confession. You just admitted on tape to knowingly bypassing compliance protocols, intimidating auditors, and willfully engaging in fraud. You admitted that you know the rules and you choose to break them. That destroys any defense of ignorance you might have planned to use. It proves intent, Brad." I tapped the screen again, sending the file to the cloud. "I just uploaded that audio to the secure server at Vanguard Risk. It has also been CC'd to the FBI case file that David just opened. Your lawyers are going to have a very hard time explaining why their client is on tape admitting he thinks he is above the law. You dug your own grave with your arrogance. I just pushed you in." Brad looked at me, and for the first time tonight he actually saw me. He did not see the invisible sister, or the failed daughter, or the data entry clerk. He saw the predator that had been sitting quietly in the tall grass, waiting for him to expose his throat. His hands were shaking so violently that he had to grip the edge of the table to keep them steady. He licked his lips, which were dry and cracked. His eyes darted from the phone in my hand to my face, searching for an explanation that would make this nightmare end. But there was no explanation that would save him. "Who are you?" he whispered. His voice was barely audible, a raspy croak of terror. "You are not just a clerk. You have access to the mainframe. You have David's private number. You have the security codes. You just authorized a code red. A data entry girl cannot do that. Who are you really? What did you do to me?" I picked up my glass of water and took a slow, deliberate sip. I let the silence stretch out, letting the question hang in the air until it became almost unbearable. I set the glass down with a soft click. "I told you I work in data processing, Brad," I said, my voice smooth and calm. "And that is true. I process the data that finds people like you. I analyze the footprints that thieves leave behind when they think no one is watching. But I do not just work for the company. I built the company." I stood up straighter, my presence filling the room. "I am the founder and chief executive officer of Vanguard Risk. We are the external audit firm that Apex Capital hires to police their internal corruption. We are the ones who wrote the algorithms that just flagged your credit card. We are the ones who built the trap you just walked into." Brad let out a small, strangled sound like a whimper. His knees seemed to buckle slightly, and he leaned heavily against the table, his knuckles turning white. "And as for your little story earlier," I continued, my eyes locking onto his. "You asked about the hawk. You said you knew her. You said you had lunch with her. You said she was your friend. You said she needed your help to understand the big picture." "Well, Brad, look at me closely." I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper that was colder than ice. "I am the hawk. That is the code name the industry gave me because I never miss a detail. I am the woman you claimed to be advising. I am the woman you said you controlled. I am the one who signs off on the compliance reports that keep your company legal." I smiled, but it did not reach my eyes. It was a smile of pure devastation. And for the record, I have been a strict vegan for 12 years. I do not eat steak. I certainly do not eat it rare. I do not drink whiskey either. But you would know that if we were actually friends, wouldn't you? You would know that if you had ever actually met me. I glanced over at my mother and Ebony. Their jaws were practically on the floor. They looked back and forth between us in total confusion. They had no idea what Vanguard Risk was. To them, the business world was just a vague concept of money and suits. They did not understand the hierarchy or the significance of my title. But they understood fear. They looked at Brad, the man they thought was a king, and they saw him trembling. They saw him shrinking into himself like a beaten dog. And they looked at me, the daughter they thought was a failure, and they saw him terrified of me. They did not need to know what a CEO was to know that the power in the room had just shifted violently in my direction. They were watching their idol fall, and they were realizing that the person pushing him was the one they had spent their whole lives underestimating. The heavy oak doors of Le Ciel swung open, not with the polite quiet of a new guest arriving, but with the authoritative weight of the law. The sound cut through the soft murmurs of the dining room, causing heads to turn in a wave of sudden silence. Two uniformed police officers stepped inside, their faces set in grim determination, their hands resting near their belts. Flanking them was a tall man in a sharp charcoal suit, wearing an earpiece and carrying himself with the distinct, terrifying calm of a federal agent. They did not stop at the host stand to ask for a reservation. They did not wait to be seated. They scanned the room, once their eyes sweeping over the candlelit tables with laser focus, until they locked onto the shivering man in the polyester suit sitting across from me. They moved in a straight line, cutting through the maze of tables like a shark cutting through water. The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted instantly from celebration to tension. The clinking of silverware stopped. The polite laughter died. The only sound was the heavy, rhythmic thud of police boots on the expensive carpet marching closer and closer to our table. Brad saw them coming. His eyes widened until they were almost perfectly round, showing the whites all around. He stood up, knocking his chair back, but there was nowhere to go. He was trapped between the table, the wall, and the approaching consequences of his own greed. The FBI agent stopped directly in front of him, blocking the light from the chandelier. He flashed a badge that caught the light, gold and heavy and authoritative. "Bradley Cooper," he said, his voice flat and loud enough for everyone to hear. "I am Special Agent Miller with the FBI. You are under arrest." Brad let out a squeak of denial, stepping back until his legs hit the overturned chair. "Arrest?" he stammered, his hands trembling in the air, palms out in a gesture of surrender. "For what? I have done nothing wrong. This is a misunderstanding. I am a vice president. I have rights." Agent Miller did not blink. "You are under arrest for federal embezzlement, securities fraud, wire fraud, and grand larceny. We have a warrant for the immediate seizure of your person and all assets in your possession. You have the right to remain silent, and I suggest you use it." Before Brad could utter another lie, the two uniformed officers moved in. They were not gentle. They grabbed his wrists, twisting his arms behind his back with practiced efficiency. Brad yelped in pain, the sound high and pathetic echoing off the high ceilings. The metallic ratchet of handcuffs clicking tight cut through the silent room. It was a cold, final sound. The sound of a door slamming shut on his life. No, Brad screamed, thrashing uselessly against the officer's iron grip. No, you cannot do this. You have the wrong guy. Look at my suit. Look at who I am. I am a partner. I am a success. He turned his desperate, wild eyes toward my sister, who was sitting frozen in her chair. Ebony, he yelled, spit flying from his mouth in his panic. Ebony, tell them. Tell them who I am. Tell them I am your fiancé. Tell them about the ring. Do not just sit there. Fix this. Call my lawyer. Say something, Ebony. But nobody moved. The diners watched in shocked fascination, holding their breath. The waiters stood frozen with their trays, and Brad stood there, cuffed and broken, screaming at a woman who was too busy hiding her face to look at him. The fantasy was over, the handcuffs were real, and the walk of shame was just beginning. The chaos of Brad being dragged toward the exit was still reverberating through the dining room, but the nightmare was not over for my family. The FBI agent did not follow the uniformed officers out the door with their prisoner. Instead, he turned on his heel and walked slowly back to our table. His expression was impassive, completely unmoved by the sobbing woman and the stunned mother sitting before him. He stopped directly in front of Ebony, who was clutching her left hand to her chest as if she were protecting a wounded bird. "Ma'am," the agent said, his voice devoid of any sympathy, "I am going to need that ring." Ebony looked up at him, her mascara running down her cheeks in black rivulets. She shook her head violently, her eyes wide with disbelief. What, she gasped, pulling back into her chair. "No, you cannot take this. This is mine. He gave it to me. We are engaged. It is a gift. You just took him. You cannot take this too. It is my property." The agent sighed, a sound that suggested he had had this exact conversation 1,000 times before with 1,000 other delusional girlfriends of white-collar criminals. He held out his hand, palm up, waiting. "Ma'am, that item was purchased less than 3 hours ago using stolen corporate funds. It is not a gift. It is evidence. It is the direct proceed of a felony crime. Now please hand it over so we do not have to make this difficult." Ebony let out a wail that was painful to hear. It was the sound of a child being told Santa Claus does not exist. "No!" she shrieked, clutching the diamond even tighter, digging her nails into her own skin. "It is $85,000. I have followers waiting to see it. I have a wedding to plan. It is mine. Do not touch me. It is mine." She looked at my mother for help, but Verna was staring at the tablecloth, her face a mask of ash. She knew better than to argue with a federal agent. But Ebony was blinded by the sparkle. She was blinded by the status she thought she had finally achieved. She physically turned her body away from the agent, curling into a ball to shield the ring from his reach. The agent took a step closer, his patience evaporating instantly. His voice dropped an octave, becoming hard and cold like steel. "Listen to me very carefully," he said. "That ring is stolen property. You are currently in possession of stolen goods. If you do not hand it over voluntarily right now, I will have no choice but to arrest you for receiving stolen property and obstruction of justice." "Sir, do you want to join your fiancé in the back of that police car? Do you want to be charged as an accomplice to his fraud?" The word accomplice hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Ebony froze. The sobbing stopped instantly. The tantrum vanished. The reality of a prison cell cut through her greed faster than any logic could. She looked at the agent and saw that he was not bluffing. She looked at the door where Brad had just been hauled away in handcuffs. She realized that her fairy tale was actually a horror story, and she was about to be written into the next chapter. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she slid the ring off her finger. It came away easily, leaving a faint red mark on her skin where it had been too big. The sparkle seemed to die as she held it out. She dropped it into the agent's palm. It did not go back into a velvet box. The agent pulled out a clear plastic evidence bag and dropped the diamond inside. It landed with a dull thud against the plastic, just another piece of cold, hard evidence in a case number. Ebony watched it go, her hands falling empty to her lap. She had chosen her freedom over the ring, but the look on her face said she felt like she had lost everything. The silence that descended on the table after the door closed was heavy enough to crush bones. The show was over. The star had been dragged off stage in handcuffs. The audience was whispering behind their napkins, casting judgmental glances our way. But there was one loose thread that still needed to be tied. The waiter returned. He looked exhausted. He looked done with the drama. But mostly he looked like a man who needed to close a check. He walked up to the table where the wreckage of our celebration lay cold and uneaten. He placed the black leather folder back in the center of the tablecloth, right between the empty chair where Brad had sat and the spot where my mother was trembling. "The bill remains outstanding," the waiter said, his voice polite but firm. "The total is $5,400. We need to settle this immediately so we can close out the register." The number hung in the air. $5,400. It was more money than my mother made in 3 months. It was more than Ebony had ever had in her bank account at one time. Verna stared at the leather folder as if it were a radioactive isotope. She looked at Ebony. Ebony looked back, her eyes red and puffy from crying. For a moment, they just sat there communicating in a silent panic of shared insolvency. Ebony Verna whispered, her voice tight with fear. "Do you have your cards? Did Brad give you a secondary card?" Ebony shook her head, sniffing loudly. "No. He paid for everything. I maxed out my credit cards buying the dress for tonight. I have maybe $40 in my account, Mom." Verna's face went pale. She began to rummage frantically through her oversized tote bag, her hands shaking as she pulled out a worn leather wallet. She opened it, checking the slots. I saw the realization hit her like a physical blow. She did not have it. Her pension check had not cleared yet. Her credit cards were already near their limit from keeping up appearances. She could not pay for the champagne she had so happily guzzled just an hour ago. They were trapped. They were sitting in the ruins of their own greed, with a bill they could not pay in a restaurant that would not hesitate to call the police back for theft of services. And then slowly, inevitably, their heads turned. They looked at me. It was the look I knew better than my own reflection. It was the look of the parasite turning to the host, the look of the abuser realizing the victim was the only way out. My mother's face transformed. The sneer of disdain vanished. The anger about the deed evaporated. In its place appeared a sickeningly sweet, desperate expression that made my skin crawl. "Simone," Verna said, her voice trembling with a sudden manufactured affection. "Simone, baby, look at this mess. That man, he deceived us all. He left us in such a terrible position." She reached across the table, her hand hovering near mine, but not quite daring to touch me. "I had no idea you were so successful. I had no idea you were a CEO. Why did you hide it from your own mother? We could have been celebrating you this whole time. But that does not matter now. What matters is family." She pointed a shaking finger at the bill. "You have the money, Simone. You are rich. You are a CEO. $5,000 is nothing to you. Pick up the check, honey. Pay the man. Do it for the family name. We cannot be humiliated like this. We cannot let people think the Blackwells cannot pay their debts. You have to save our honor, Simone. You owe us that much after keeping secrets for so long. Be the good daughter I know you are and fix this." I looked at her pleading eyes. I looked at Ebony, who was nodding vigorously, expecting me to open my purse and clean up their mess like I always did. They thought that just because they discovered my value, they were entitled to my resources. They thought that money erased the abuse. They thought that calling me family now would make me forget they were ready to sell my home to a thief an hour ago. They were wrong. I looked at the hopeful expressions plastered on the faces of my mother and sister. For 30 years, those looks had worked on me. For 30 years, the guilt trips, the appeals to family duty, and the threats of rejection had forced me to open my wallet and clean up their messes. They looked at me and saw an ATM machine that they could insult until they needed cash. They saw the golden goose that they could kick and abuse, knowing it would still lay the egg when they got hungry. I reached into my purse. The collective sigh of relief from Verna and Ebony was audible. They slumped back in their chairs, their postures relaxing. They thought they had won. They thought that underneath the CEO title and the cold demeanor, I was still the same desperate little girl who would pay any price for their approval. They were already mentally moving on to how they would spin this story to their friends, how they would make themselves the victims, and me the dutiful servant. I pulled out my wallet. It was a simple, sleek leather piece, not a flashy designer knockoff covered in logos. I opened it slowly, letting the suspense build. I bypassed the row of platinum credit cards. I bypassed the corporate expense card that could have cleared the bill with a single swipe. Instead, my fingers closed around a single crisp bill. I pulled out $100. I placed the bill on the table, directly on top of the black leather folder. It sat there lonely and green against the dark leather. I smoothed it out with my index finger, ensuring it was perfectly flat. "This is $100, I said, my voice calm and final. "My sparkling water cost $9. The rest is a $91 tip for the staff. They deserve it for having to witness this circus, and for having to deal with the three of you." I withdrew my hand and snapped my purse shut. The sound was like a gavel ending a court session. My mother stared at the single bill, her eyes bulging. "But Simone," she stammered, her voice rising in panic. "What about the rest? The bill is over $5,000. That is not even close to enough." I stood up, slinging my purse over my shoulder. "I know," I replied, looking down at them. "That is the point. The rest of the bill is not my responsibility. I did not order the champagne. I did not order the soufflés. And I certainly did not order the arrogance that came with them. You two enjoyed the party, now you can pay the cover charge." I gestured to the pile of designer goods they were wearing. "You have options. Ebony, that handbag is a limited edition, is it not? And Mom, those earrings look heavy. I am sure the restaurant manager would be happy to take them as collateral. Or if that does not cover it, I hear the kitchen is always looking for dishwashers. It might be a good character-building exercise for both of you." Ebony shot out of her chair, her face twisted with entitlement. "You cannot do this," she screamed, stamping her foot like a toddler. "You are rich. You are a CEO. You have millions of dollars. You cannot leave your own mother and sister here to wash dishes. It is humiliating. You are selfish." I paused and looked at her one last time. I looked at the sister who had mocked my job. I looked at the mother who had tried to sell my home. I felt absolutely nothing for them. The bond was severed. The contract was void. "You are right, Ebony," I said, my voice ice cold. "I am rich. I have built a fortune by knowing the difference between an asset and a liability. My money is for investment, it is for growth, it is for people who bring value to my life. It is not for charity. And it is certainly not for bailing out people who have spent my entire life treating me like dirt." I turned my back on them. I did not look back at their shocked faces. I did not listen to their wails of protest. I walked toward the door, feeling lighter with every step. I was done paying for their love. I was keeping my money. And more importantly, I was keeping my dignity. I clamped my arm tighter around the worn manila envelope, feeling the rough texture of the paper against my side. It was not just a stack of legal documents. It was my history. It was the smell of my grandmother's old books, the sound of her humming in the kitchen, and the safety I had lost the day she died. Now I had it back. I walked toward the heavy oak doors of the restaurant, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the floor. I did not rush. I did not run. I walked with the unhurried grace of a woman who has already won the war. Behind me, the chaos was escalating. I heard the scrape of a chair and the frantic, desperate footsteps of my mother trying to pursue me. "Simone," she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "You come back here right now. Where do you think you are going? That belongs to me. Give me that deed. You cannot just steal my property and walk away. You ungrateful thief!" I stopped just before the exit. I did not turn my whole body. I simply cast a glance over my shoulder, looking at her with a detached pity. She was blocked by the restaurant manager and two waiters who were demanding she settle the bill, but she was straining against them, her eyes fixed on the envelope under my arm. "You are confused, Verna," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the room, cutting through her noise. "You never owned this house. The deed is still in Grandma's name. I read the will. I know the law. She left the property to me. You were merely appointed as the executor and temporary guardian until I came of age. You were supposed to protect the asset, not liquidate it to fund a criminal's escape." My mother froze, her face pale with shock. I continued, my voice hard as granite. "You breached your fiduciary duty tonight. You tried to sell a trust asset for personal gain without the beneficiary's consent. That is illegal, Mom. My legal team has already drafted the motion. At 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, we are filing a petition with the probate court to remove you as executor and transfer full title to me immediately. You will never step foot in that house again." I paused, letting the finality of the words sink in. "Goodbye, Mother. I hope the soufflé was worth it." I pushed the doors open and stepped out into the cool, crisp night air of Atlanta. The valet stand was crowded with people waiting for their cars. But as soon as I appeared, a long, sleek shadow pulled up to the curb, scattering the other attendants. It was a Bentley Flying Spur, deep black and shining under the streetlights. It was a far cry from the Honda they thought I drove. My private driver, James, stepped out of the vehicle, immediately buttoning his blazer. He opened the rear door with a gloved hand, bowing slightly. "Good evening, Ms. Blackwell," he said, his voice respectful and calm. "I trust the meeting went well." "It was productive, James," I replied, sliding into the back seat. The interior smelled of rich leather and quiet success. I settled into the seat, and the door closed with a solid, heavy thud, sealing out the noise of the street and the toxicity of the family I was leaving behind. I reached into the center console and pulled out my iPad. I tapped the screen, bringing up the quarterly projections for Vanguard Risk. I did not look out the window. I did not look back at the restaurant where my mother and sister were currently trying to explain to the police why they could not pay a $5,000 bill. That was not my problem anymore. I had a company to run. I had a library to build. And for the first time in my life, I was truly free. "Drive, James," I said, keeping my eyes on the data. "Let's go home." This story teaches us that true power is rarely found in loud boasts or flashy displays of wealth, but rather in quiet competence and unshakable integrity. Brad and the family chased the shallow illusion of status, believing that a fancy suit and a stolen credit card made a man valuable, while they mocked the quiet diligence of Simone. They failed to realize that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one listening in silence and observing every detail. It reminds us that greed is a blinding force that can lead us to trust wolves in sheep's clothing while betraying the very people who actually care for us. Ultimately, Simone's journey is a powerful testament to the importance of self-worth and financial independence. She did not let her family's cruelty define her reality. Instead, she built her own empire in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to protect her legacy. It serves as a stark reminder that success is the best revenge, and that sometimes protecting your peace means walking away from the people who share your blood but not your values. If you enjoyed seeing justice served and the underdog win, hit that follow button for more stories of karma and redemption.